Hello and welcome to the Commander's Quarters. I'm your host, Mitch. Glad to have you here. Here at the Commander's Quarters, we're all about Commander on a budget. Today we have an episode of Commander's 2 Cents. On episodes like these, I give you my own personal take on topics about the format in general and current news. This show and episodes like this one are possible thanks to viewers like you. If you're looking for an easy way to help support this show, make sure that you like, share, and subscribe. Also, hit that bell notification icon so you don't miss any new episodes. And while you're at it, subscribe and review our podcast as well. You can also go check out our playmats and other merchandise at thecommandersquarters.com. Another easy way to support this show is with our TCG player affiliate links. So whether you're buying a deck or individual cards, you can use this general link right here or one in the description. And the final way that you can support this show is by supporting us directly by becoming a patron. There are many benefits to being a patron, and I truly couldn't do this without all of their support. So in some recent episodes, I've been talking about some insights that I've gotten from some data that I gathered from EDH Rec. One of those episodes was the most expensive commanders to build around. Basically, I took the average deck cost of all the commanders in Magic that have 100 decks or more, and I said, which are the most expensive? If you want to learn about how I actually got that data and how I'm applying it and working with it, go and check out my episode on the cost of your commander collection. I go into pretty good detail on my process there, but this time I'll just give you a quick overview. Essentially, for commanders that had at least 100 decks built around them on EDH Rec, I took their average deck and I plugged that into TCG Player's Optimizer and optimized with heavily played and damaged cards. Their cost does not include basic lands, but all prices do include the commander cost. So in the previous episode, I talked about one extreme with the most expensive, and on this episode, we're going to do the opposite. So on today's episode, we're going to be talking about the most budget-friendly commanders to build around. Now, I've mentioned this before, but any commander can be built on a budget. In contrast, any commander can also be built to be extremely expensive. But in general, there are some commanders that lend themselves a bit more towards the budget builds. Now, this is going to be a case-by-case basis, and I'll bring up some points on why a commander might lend itself a bit more towards budget with this list. Now, with all that said, let's jump into it. So let's start things off with number 10. And the 10th most budget-friendly commander to build around is Grumgully the Generous. Grumgully is a 3/3 Goblin Shaman that costs 1 red-green. It has each other non-human creature you control enters the battlefield with an initial +1/+1 counter on it. Currently, the average EDH Rec deck built around Grumgully is going to set you back $90.42. Now, Grumgully is a multicolor commander, but it gives you green, so you've got access to some of the best land fixing and ramp. And also, this deck can really utilize some inexpensive creatures that other decks might just pass by. And those would be creatures with Persist. So creatures like Airy Oofs, Scuzzback Marauders, and Thunderblast are fantastic for this deck. Because they have Persist, when they die, they come back into play with a -1/-1 counter on them. But then because they're not human, Grumgully also gives them a +1/+1 counter. Those counters cancel out, and basically you just get to keep persisting that creature. So if you've got a free sacrifice outlet, that's infinite ETBs, LTBs, etc., etc. It's pretty easy to build this deck in an effective way with a very small budget. And when I say very small, I just mean comparatively to other commanders and their average cost. But anyway, let's move on to an even more budget-friendly commander with number 9. And coming in at 9th place, we've got Anax and Cymede. They're a 3/2 human soldier with First Strike and Vigilance that costs 1 red-white. Anax and Cymede has Heroic. When you cast a spell that targets Anax and Cymede, creatures you control get +1/+1 and gain trample until end of turn. So basically, this commander can help pump up your army, and it encourages you to cast spells that target it. The average EDH Rec deck cost built around Anax and Cymede is $89.09. Again, with this deck, you want to run a ton of cheap spells that target. So some great options are Crown of Flames and Mark of Fury, both of which you can get back to your hand to cast again. And other great options are cheap ones like Defiant Strike that also cantrip too. These cards really don't see a lot of play in other decks, and that's why they're so cheap. Niche strategies can definitely lend themselves more towards budget decks. Because again, if other decks don't want to use these kinds of cards, they're going to be cheap for the most part. But now let's move on to our first monocolor commander for this list with number 8. And coming in at 8th place, we've got Mau Loyal Companion. Mau is a 3/3 hound with Trample and Vigilance that costs 3 and a green. It has if one or more +1/+1 counters will be put on Mau Loyal Companion, that many +1/+1 counters are put on instead. The average EDH Rec Mau deck cost is going to be $84.85. Many Mau decks are pretty straightforward, just being a Voltron deck built around counters. So cards that might not see a lot of play elsewhere can be very valuable here. Some of the cards that you might see are Retreat to Kazandu, Ivy Lane Denizen, and Ancient Animus. A lot of +1/+1 counters decks care about getting counters on all of your creatures. But this one just cares about getting counters on Mau, so those cards might not be used in other decks. And again, being in mono green, you've got access to some great cheap ramp spells. But now let's move away from monocolor and into a 3-color commander with number 7. And that commander is going to be Dagatar the Adamant. He's a 0/0 human warrior with Vigilance that costs 3 and a white. Dagatar enters the battlefield with 4 +1/+1 counters on it. And by paying 1 Golgari, you move a +1/+1 counter from target creature onto a second target creature. The average deck built around this commander is going to set you back $76.97. So like our last commander, Dagatar deals with +1/+1 counters, but in a different way. He can move them around to whatever creature needs them on your team. Decks built around Daggertar tend to be built around benefiting you from having ++1 counters on multiple creatures. So cards like Abzan Battle Priest, Tuskguard Captain, and Mare Elk Nightblade can be huge for this deck. All of these have Outlast, so you can basically pay and tap them to put a ++1 counter on them. But Abzan Battle Priest says each creature you control with a ++1 counter on it has lifelink. Tuskguard Captain does the exact same thing, but it's Trample, and Mare Elk Nightblade does the exact same thing, but it's Death Touch. Again, for the most part, these cards are cheap because they don't see a ton of play in other decks. And again, even though this is a 3-color deck, you've got access to green, so you've got some efficient and cheap mana ramp and mana fixing. And speaking of green, let's move on to our next commander with number 6. And the 6th most budget-friendly commander to build around is Sacia Orochi Ascendant. It's a 2/3 Snake Monk that costs 1 green. It says reveal your hand if you've got 7 or more land cards in your hand, flip Sacia Orochi Ascendant. It flips into Sacia's Essence, which says whenever a land you control is tapped for mana, add 1 mana of that type to your mana pool for each other land you control with the same name. The average deck built around this commander costs $74.93. And perhaps the main reason for that low cost is that you're going to be running a ton of forests. In fact, the average amount of lands for this commander is 46. The more lands that you have in your deck, the easier it is to get to 7 lands that you can actually flip your commander. And then once your commander is flipped, the more forests that you have, the more mana that you can tap for. And you're also running a ton of cards that actually just get you lands into your hand, and those aren't as expensive as ones that actually ramp you. So cards like Nissa's Triumph, Seek the Horizon, and Sprouting Vines can be fantastic in this deck. Again, you need 7 lands in your hand to actually flip your commander, and these can come in huge. But now let's move away from green and onto a different mono color with number 5. And coming in at 5th place, we've got Zada Hedron Grinder. She's a 3/3 Goblin ally that costs 3 and a red. She has whenever you cast an instant sorcery spell that only targets Zada, copy that spell for each other creature you control that the spell could target. Each copy targets a different one of those creatures. So essentially you just cast something that only targets Zada, and that copies and targets all your other creatures. The average EDH rec deck for Zada costs $74.24. This deck is going to utilize a ton of cards that again don't see too much play elsewhere. Cards like Dragon Fodder can help you fill the board with creatures. And then cheap target spells like Expedite and Fists of Flame can help you draw cards and actually finish opponents off too. If you ever want to see a mono red deck draw a ton of cards for not a lot of mana, check out Zada. But now it's time for us to move on to number 4. And the 4th most budget-friendly commander is Gallia of the Endless Dance. She's a 2/2 satyr with haste that costs red-green. She has other satyrs you control get ++1 and have haste, and whenever you attack with 3 or more creatures, you may discard a card at random. If you do, draw 2 cards. The average EDH rec Gallia deck is going to set you back $70.33. And for the most part, it seems like Gallia is built in one way, and that would be Satyr Tribal. So with this kind of a deck, you might see some cards like Nyxborn Reliquer, Reckless Reveler, and Satyr Hedonist. And satyrs typically are very cheap creatures. So when you have a very cheap tribal commander, you've got a cheap deck. Essentially just play your satyrs and swing away. But now let's move away from satyrs and onto something else with number 3. And the 3rd most budget-friendly commander to build around is Depala Pilot Exemplar. She's a 3/3 dwarf pilot that costs 1 red-white. She has other dwarves you control get ++1, and each vehicle you control gets ++1 as long as it's a creature. And whenever Depala Pilot Exemplar becomes tapped, you may pay X. If you do, reveal the top X cards of your library, put all dwarf and vehicle cards from among them into your hand, then put the rest in the bottom of your library in a random order. So essentially she's a tribal commander for dwarves and vehicles. And there are plenty of cheap dwarves and vehicles out there that interact really well together. So in a Depala deck, you're probably going to see some cheap vehicles out there like Untethered Express. And you're also going to see some dwarves that can help with your vehicles with Veteran Motorist and Renegade Wheelsmith. Again, tribal commanders that are built around cheap tribes tend to be cheap decks. But now it's time for us to move on to number 2. And the 2nd most budget-friendly commander out there is Halar the Firefletcher. Halar is a 3/3 elf archer with trample that costs 1 red-green. It says whenever you cast a spell, if that spell was kicked, put a ++1 counter on Halar, then Halar deals damage equal to the number of ++1 counters on it to each opponent. So basically get counters on Halar, cast kick spells, and deal a ton of damage to your opponents. The average Halar EDH rec deck is going to cost you $62.55. Like I mentioned with Mawu, many decks out there aren't looking to just put ++1 counters on one creature. So a card like Hunger the Howlpack can be great in this deck, and it's very inexpensive. And for the most part, kicker spells like Overload and Mold Shambler tend to be pretty inexpensive as well. But now it's time for us to move on to the most budget-friendly commander with number 1. And the most budget-friendly commander is Grunn the Lonely King. Grunn is a 5/5 ape warrior that costs 4 green. He has kicker for 3, and if he was kicked, he enters the battlefield with 5 ++1 counters on him. And then whenever Grunn attacks alone, you double its power and toughness until end of turn. The average Grunn EDH rec deck is only $48.45. So essentially if Grunn is a 5/5, it's going to swing for 10. If Grunn is a 10/10 because you kicked it, it swings for 20. Basically, you just want to get Grunn out there and swing big. So you're going to be running some ramp with things like Elfame Druid. You can run some things to give it trample with Talons of the Wildwood, and you're going to run things to protect it with Ranger's Guile. Again, essentially just a bunch of cheap things to help Grunn out and to help him swing big. This is a very straightforward commander, and it's not surprising as to why it's a very cheap one to build around. Again, it's utilizing a ton of cards that otherwise don't see too much play. But again, any and all commanders can be either built on a budget or they can be built expensively too. And with that, this show is coming to a close, so it's my turn to hear from you. So in the comments below, let me know what your favorite budget commander is and why. And make sure you're following us on social media for more updates and sneak peeks on future episodes. Again, a huge thank you to my patrons who help make this show possible. I truly couldn't do any of this without your support. If you want to support this channel directly, consider becoming a patron. There are many benefits to being a patron, including being able to vote on future commanders for deck techs. There are even tiers where you get your own personalized deck tech dedicated to you. You can check out all the Patreon tiers and rewards at patreon.com/commandersquarters. If you haven't already, make sure that you like and subscribe to the channel. Here at the Commander's Quarters, we're all about budget commander. So while you're at it, go ahead and check out some of our other types of episodes. And with that, I'm out of here. Thanks again and have a good one.